So, having the second council presidency of Slovenia, and this time we are in hot topics on Western Balkans politics. We want to focus a bit on the country's role and outlook and perhaps visions for its own neighborhood, the EU neighborhood, but especially the not yet EU neighborhood. In 2008, actually, Slovenia took the presidency over, and then it came to a boost for the Croatian membership. So perhaps this time it will be a boost for other partners in the region. What is the Slovenian role in the neighborhood of its own? What is the Slovenian role in enlargement? How can Slovenia perhaps contribute for accelerating and bringing more credibility back to the enlargement process? And what are the current debates on non-papers and other topics are having to do with this all? I'm really delighted and distinguished panel for you, and I'm really grateful for having this debate today. I think it's a hot topic in a really important time frame, and at this crossroads, it's worth enough to have a more specific view on Slovenia, not only but also from Berlin and to the region. Thank you so much, and I hand over to Christian Hagemann and to the pitch.
I will take over at this point. Thank you, Manuel, Sarrazin, and good luck. Hopefully many goals will be scored. And so it's my great pleasure to introduce the panel. My name is Florian Bieber. I'm a member of the Presidium of the Südosteuropa-Gesellschaft, as well as a professor of Southeast European history and politics at the University of Graz. I think we have an excellent panel to discuss the Slovenian presidency in regard to the Western Balkans and EU enlargement. And let me first introduce our panelists for the audience. First of all, Peter Grk, who is not just the Western Balkans coordinator at the Slovenian Foreign Ministry, he's also the Secretary General of the Bled Strategic Forum, which many of you might be familiar with. He has a long experience and career in diplomacy, having been a foreign policy advisor to the Prime Minister, as well as an advisor to the Foreign Minister. He's been working on the Western Balkans, and he knows both the previous accession processes as well as the Western Balkans well, and we've met on many chances, so I'm very grateful that he's in a certain way also responsible for in the presidency for looking at the Western Balkans. So we'll hear from him what the priorities are, and then subsequently we'll hear from our three panelists responses and questions. And first of all, we're going to hear from Ambassador Susanne Schütz, who is in charge, the director for Southeastern Europe, Turkey, the EFTA, OSCE, the Council of Europe at the Federal Foreign Ministry. She has been ambassador of Germany to Albania between 2016 and 19 and has a long diplomatic track record both in the region and elsewhere. Then the next speaker will be Gerald Knaus, well known as the founding chairman of the European Stability Initiative, which grew out of the Balkans and became global and dealt with important pressing policy questions in the European Union, and who continues to follow the Western Balkans and will share some of his thoughts with us today. And finally, we will have Simonida Kacarska, who is the director of the European Policy Institute in Skopje in North Macedonia, and she has been following EU enlargement reforms in the Western Balkans, both as a scholar, as a researcher, and working for a think tank, and involved in a number of civil society initiatives and advice to international organizations. So she will bring us the perspective also from the region. So we're going to first kick off with Peter, who will give us some insights into the plans of the Slovenian presidency. We'll have several rounds of questions from our panelists. The audience is invited to participate. You can write your questions into the Q&A function. You can do this throughout the session. In fact, the earlier you raise the questions, the more likely it is that we're going to be able to have a chance to include it. Please apologize if we can't include all of the questions, but do put them in there. You can even vote which question you like, but this is no guarantee that I will ask it. But again, all of the panelists will see the questions. They can also pick up on them in the course of their answers and responses, and we'll try to incorporate as many questions and thoughts as possible. So that's it for the formalities. We have a bit less than an hour and a half, and I'll hand over to Peter to hear his thoughts and reflections.
Thank you very much, Florian, for this introduction. And hello to everybody who is listening to us and also to fellow speakers. It's an honor to be in such a distinguished company. At the beginning, I will try to be quite short because I think we need to be as interactive as possible in order to garner as much ideas as possible about how to move forward with the Western Balkans, because we have a problem. I think we have a problem with enlargement, and this is something we can't shy away from. I mean, it's clear that some things are not working properly. It's clear that we are in some kind of limbo state. And this is, you know, if you want a practical example, this is shown by the fact that we haven't opened not one cluster or negotiating chapter with any country in the Western Balkans in the last year or since the new methodology of enlargement was adopted. And this, you know, it produces, it doesn't produce hope, let's say like this. Regarding our presidency, let me tell you a secret. Slovenia will definitely have enlargement in the Western Balkans as one of the key priorities of the presidency in the foreign policy field, simply because it's something, you know, it's a region which is in our doorstep, and we are sincere believers that consolidated Europe is the one which includes, or European Union, which includes also countries of the Western Balkans. So for us, the priority, if I jump now into the subject, the priority of the presidency in terms of Western Balkans and enlargement is going to be to somehow rekindle the hope, somehow rekindle the political will, the ambition and the passion of European Union about enlargement and the necessity, and to introduce a little bit more of a geostrategic thinking when it comes to the Western Balkans, and also what it means for the future of Europe. The problem which we see is that Europe has been never dealing with the Western Balkans in a very geostrategical way. If it would, then the results would be different, because we are not talking about China, we are not talking about, you know, big country as Turkey. We are talking about a population of 60 million people, I think. So it's not a big region, but it's a region which is very, very important. It's at the crossroads. It's in the heart of Europe, and as such, needs to be put into the or under the strategic or geopolitical umbrella of European Union. This was not the case until now, as it was stated before. I think we made some concrete steps. It's not that you know, nothing was done. This would be a false statement, but simply it was not done enough to move this region closer to European Union. So in this sense, I think it's high time, also with the debate on the future of Europe looming, that we start introducing some sort of hope and ambition into this whole debate about the enlargement process and its continuation. So to be more practical, because now I talked more about you know, how we look at the region from a strategical point of view. To be more practical, definitely one thing which for us is very, very important is to start negotiations with North Macedonia and Albania, and also to open some clusters with Montenegro and Serbia. We think this is possible. We think this is something that we would like to do. But of course, you know, we are just the presidency. We need a collective effort, not just from the part of European Union, but also from the part of the Western Balkan countries in order to fulfill this ambitious agenda. So this is on one side, enlargement and bringing back this hope and revitalizing the whole process. Secondly, of course, we would like to continue with the whole connectivity agenda, be it on the infrastructural field, be it in the field of energy, transport, people-to-people contacts, youth, and so on and so on. With this in mind, we are working closely with European Commission. We are working closely also with Germany, because as you all know, we are waiting for the summit of the Berlin process, which is going to take place on the 5th of July. And the summit and the results of the summit will kick off this, let's say, summer of Western Balkans and the preparations for the EU Western Balkans summit, which is going to take place on the 6th of October. So, you know, in this sense, we would very much like to see how much and in what areas we will be able to advance some of the connectivity projects until 5th of July. I'm talking about roaming, I'm talking about mutual recognition of documents and so on, and then see what we can improve further in the connectivity field until the summit, EU Western Balkans, which is going to take place on the 6th of October. Regarding the connectivity projects, here special emphasis would be given to sustainable development. This means railway connections. This means green lanes concept. We would very much like to continue with the implementation of this concept between the countries of European Union and the countries of Western Balkans. And special emphasis we would like to put also on the field of cybersecurity and the strengthening relations between the EU and Western Balkans in order to fight this phenomena. And lastly, but not lastly, it's decarbonization and green agenda. Here we think massive efforts will be needed on the part of European Union and on the part of the countries of the Western Balkans if we really want to move this agenda from coal to green to some sort of practical results. So the agenda is quite huge. I think the agenda is quite ambitious. The presidencies, of course, have changed, you know, since 2008. Also, the European Union changed a little bit. The Western Balkans also changed a little bit. But here we are again with our ambitions. But right now, in this time and place, our ambitions are even more, you know, their realization is going to happen only with coordination and cooperation with our partners inside of European Union, and also if we think about some of the issues in the Western Balkans with our transatlantic partners in Washington. So with this, I think I would like to stop and give floor back to you, Florian, to move this debate forward. And of course, I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Great, thanks a lot, Peter, for kicking us off, offering both the larger perspective as well as some concrete dates and particular points along the map, which you're keeping on your radar. So let's just have a first round of responses and also reflections from our other panelists. And I would give over the floor to Ambassador Schütz to hear what is her take on what could be achieved in the next 6 months.
Yes, thank you very much to the SOG, and thank you also, Peter, for outlining Slovenia's positions and priorities. As part of the trio presidency, together with Portugal, Germany shares with Slovenia the conviction that the future of all 6 Western Balkan countries lies in the European Union. It is not only geography which links us closely, but also deep human, historical, and cultural ties, as well as extensive economic and trade opportunities. Also, it is a region where social and security challenges, as well as instabilities, may have a direct effect on the EU. And this is why we are convinced that the EU integration of the Western Balkans is not only in the interest of the countries themselves, but it is also of strategic importance for the EU. And we therefore remain fully committed to the Western Balkan EU perspective, and we need to send a clear message of support to the Western Balkans and credibly underline this EU perspective for the region remains a priority high on the EU agenda. And we welcome very much that with Slovenia, a country is assuming the EU presidency, which is a close neighbor to the Western Balkans, and not only very well understands the region and its historic background, but also itself went through a tough process of transformation on its path into the EU. As the Western Balkan countries are implementing an ambitious reform process, Slovenia's experience will give important guidance and support. The countries of the Western Balkans need to strengthen rule of law, fight corruption and organized crime, protect the freedom of the media, and create more space for democracy to thrive. Such reforms will attract greater foreign investment, but will also give young people perspectives and thus stop the brain drain from the region. But also the European Union must stand by its commitments. You deliver, we deliver must remain our approach to European Union enlargement. And I agree with Peter that there is a problem. And this is why it will be very important to now go ahead with opening of accession talks with North Macedonia and Albania, as was promised already in March of last year. Both North Macedonia and Albania have delivered sustainable progress on justice reform, the fight against corruption and organized crime. And in the Prespa agreement, Skopje and Athens showed historic political leadership. This is why accession talks with North Macedonia and Albania should start now. Both Germany and Portugal have tried very hard as EU presidencies to reach a consensus on the negotiation frameworks as a prerequisite for first intergovernmental conferences. There still is a slight chance that the Portuguese presidency might be successful in convincing both the Bulgarian and Macedonian governments to support the Portuguese compromise proposal. They have our full support. However, if not, this task will fall under the Slovenian presidency, and Peter has made it very clear that Slovenia is determined to finally come to a positive result. More challenges are there to be met on the Western Balkans. For the EU, the unresolved relationship between Kosovo and Serbia remains a major stumbling block for the entire region's advancement towards the EU. For Montenegro, we hope for further progress in accession negotiations and continuation on the country's path towards strong institutions, including rule of law and an independent judiciary. And in Bosnia-Herzegovina, more than 25 years after Dayton, we see a worrying deadlock and aggressive divisive rhetoric. We welcome the support given to Christian Schmidt as the next High Rep in Bosnia and Herzegovina, who will give new impulses to implementing the 5+2 agenda of the OHR and advance Bosnia-Herzegovina on its path to the EU. As current chair of the Western Balkan Berlin process, these are messages which we have also stressed at the recent virtual foreign ministers meeting in preparation for the Berlin Process Summit on July 5th. We have, in the past 7 years, achieved some important results. The Regional Youth and Youth Cooperation Office has connected thousands of youngsters across national borders. In the pandemic, the country has created green lanes, thus allowing goods to move across borders despite COVID restrictions. And next month, the new agreement lifting roaming fees in the region will come into force. And at the Berlin Process Summit last year, the most ambitious project so far, the Common Regional Market, was launched. The Common Regional Market is a key factor in overcoming the socioeconomic effects of the pandemic and to boost regional cooperation and integration in the Western Balkans. Until the summit of July 5th, we expect further concrete progress, and we strongly encourage all Western Balkan governments to take the necessary decisions in order to make the summit a success for the people in the region. In particular, the agreement on free movement with identity cards would boost trade and travel. Similarly, the unified visa area, as well as the mutual recognition of academic and professional qualifications, would make life easier for many of the citizens. It would be an important step ahead for the region if these agreements can be finalized in the remaining weeks. We are convinced that this would also offer a good starting point for the events planned under the Slovenian presidency. For us, the key messages to the region are clear. There is no alternative for the region other than the integration into the European Union. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Schütz. So let's hear now from Gerald Knaus' perspective from the first think tank perspective on what should be done, could be done in the Slovenian presidency.
Yes,
Gerald, the floor is yours. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Florian. Thanks a lot to the SOG and to everyone who's put this together. And let me pick up where Peter has left us and build on some of the things that we've heard from the German Foreign Ministry, from Ambassador Schütz, on where things might go. How might the Slovenian presidency revive EU Balkan policy? Now, the basic starting point has to be realism. Realism about the Balkans, where it really stands today, and realism about Europe. There is no point imagining that the European Union will do things which it will not do, because we've had many years of experiences of what the European Union is able to do. Realism doesn't mean complacency, and this is one of the problems. If we look back to the 1990s, the Balkans was at the center of attention. It was what people thought about in Europe, because this is where violent conflicts took place. But if we look at the last 10 years, all the violent conflicts took place around the European Union. This is one great success of European policy of the 90s, of enlargement, that was creating a zone of stability and peace. The conflicts are in Ukraine, in the Caucasus, in Syria, in Iraq, in Libya, or the repression in Belarus. There's a circle of fire, of violence, brutality surrounding Europe. In Libya and Syria, in the Caucasus, we gotten used to not seeing those images from inside Europe, nor do we imagine that there will be any country in Europe with a lot of political prisoners in the Balkans in the way we see in Belarus today. The Western Balkans is a very different reality, and that is a great thing and one of our problems. When we read the newspapers about the Balkans in the last decade, in the last 2 years, it's about elections. A new government in Skopje, elections in Montenegro, presidential elections in Serbia, elections in Kosovo. Bosnia has now had 8 sets of parliamentary elections, regular, found to be free and fair largely by election observers, leading to changes in governments. North Macedonia has a government with 23 ministers. 10 of them are from minority members. This looks normal today, and that's a great thing. It wasn't that long ago, 20 years ago, that we had a very different situation in North Macedonia. And in Bosnia too, of course, we've had now 11 Bosnian prime ministers since '97 from 7 different parties. This is not something to be taken for granted. Elections change power, no political prisoners, no troops needed to preserve the peace. Unexpected breakthroughs with neighbors, and even from time to time recently, some enlargement. So this is all great, but there is a real danger of complacency. The Balkan intervention worked, but if we look at the threats to stability, we don't need to look very far. In the 1980s, one thing that was underestimated was the power of intellectuals at universities developing dangerous ideas. This man at the University of Sarajevo, Vojislav Šešelj, thinking up of how you divide countries along ethnic lines between Serbia and Croatia right through Bosnia. That's what he was working on in the 80s as an academic. These ideas were picked up by politicians, and we all remember how Slobodan Milosevic used stories of battles and heroes. But stories can change, and the reason the Balkans have been stable the last 20 years is because men like him, Aleksandar Vučić, the general secretary of Mr. Šešelj's party in the early 90s, suddenly reverted, changed story, and now started to talk for a decade already about taking their country to Europe. Now, this is a very good thing. The European story, the strategy of 2003, the year of Thessaloniki, was that the progressive spread of the rule of law and democracy are happening through successive enlargements. The secret of European power is the belief in enlargement. And the vision for majorities of the public is that this integration will lead to prosperity in the Balkans as it has in Romania, Estonia, Poland, or Lithuania. But is this story still credible? Peter Gerald put it well. We have a problem because this story cannot remain credible year after year after year without progress. Integration today is like waiting for Godot. It isn't just that Kosovo and Bosnia-Herzegovina are still not candidates and it's not on the horizon for the moment. It isn't that North Macedonia was a candidate in 2005 and 16 years later it's still not starting accession talks. It is that the front runners are stuck. It is that the methodology is not delivering for Serbia or Montenegro, that they have not closed any meaningful chapters. They are not getting closer to joining. And the reason we've had problems recently are very obvious. And you only need to read the French debate, follow the French parliament, listen to what the French president says, not to mention some of the interventions by Dutch parliamentarians, regional neighbors, and others. The vision of the Balkans is becoming increasingly contested in the EU. And then there are others. The EU is not alone, of course. The geopolitical tug of war and the charm offensives by other outsiders when Mr. Vučić said in 2020 that all my personal hopes rest on China. These statements are coming more and more regularly. The stories of the past are returning. The headlines in Serbian newspapers in recent years are like this. The war in Kosovo will begin in December. This has been ongoing for years. And if we don't want to repeat the mistake, this is a warning sign. Headlines from Serbian newspapers just a few days ago. Suddenly, the men who committed ethnic cleansing and genocide are presented again as heroes. And military spending in the region in some countries is actually still very high. Now, why is that? We've just seen a country in the Caucasus build up its military year after year after year, and suddenly we had another war. Peter put it as the task of rekindling hope and being practical. So what can Slovenia achieve? Well, one thing is not to underestimate. If we don't win the battle of stories, if people don't believe that this technocratic process that is going from summit to summit actually will change their lives, then there will be intellectuals and politicians that will pick up other stories, as some of these tabloids in Serbia have already started doing. They don't talk much about chapters. They talk about new wars on the horizon. So we need to move the debate on integration. Realism about Europe means that sometimes the path to success is indirect. We didn't create the European community all at once. It was created through functional integration. And the question is really, what is the coal and steel of the 21st century? And for the Western Balkans, the single most important thing would be access to the common market and its rules. Why is this so important? Because if you want to create an economy in the Western Balkans in a time in which all of our economies are undergoing drastic change, decarbonization, a Balkans without coal, a Balkans with completely new energy, you need sectoral and regulatory integration now in different fields in all 6 countries, and it must be the focus of societies, administrations, and politicians. Now, in order to get there, we need an accession process that is credible with targets that are inspiring. We need to focus on concrete threats jointly. Instead of having Serbia build up its military and buy tanks and other equipment, invest in disaster preparedness. Forest fires and floods are going to be even stronger in the next few years. Now, this is the kind of thing the European Union is already beginning to work on and can work on much more. But we also need a vision that is believed in. Now, you know this idea, and I'm sure in the end, if we don't embrace it, we will not have any accession process. Because when the European Union found a similar problem in its accession process in the late 1980s, with Finland and Sweden and Austria and Norway wanting to join, and some countries not being ready, it found a way around it. It said you can first join the single market, you join the 4 freedoms, you are then basically fully integrated into the rules, including the rule of law, environmental rules, procurement rules, corruption rules. It is the same destination as accession, but we start now. And the second vision, of course, is Swiss borders in the Balkans. Instead of discussing changing borders, Europe has found out, we know exactly, because 5 countries launched this process in 1985, how to create an area in which you can make controls between countries unnecessary. The original Schengen strategy of 1985, which took a few years, should be exported to the Balkans. Instead of talking about changing borders, the borders between North Macedonia and Serbia, between Serbia and Montenegro, between Serbia and Kosovo, between Albania and Kosovo, Kosovo and Serbia and Bosnia should look like this border, which is the border between Switzerland and Germany. How to get there, and this is my last slide. The message is that a lot of progress has been made. One problem of the Balkans is that people in capitals, in most EU capitals, don't wake up, chancellors, prime ministers, presidents, thinking about the Balkans, because there are so many big crises around Europe that take their attention. But complacency is dangerous. We are seeing stories reemerge that should warn us. Offering a road to the common market with the rule of law to all the Western Balkan 6, when at the moment Kosovo and Bosnia are lost and even the front runners are stuck, is crucial. Slovenia will not be able to do it alone, and it might not be able to do it under its presidency, but we need to push the debate, the agenda in this direction. If we don't focus on what we need for a serious breakthrough, we risk losing a major opportunity. And my final point is we need to make the image of a very different region, at least by 2030, credible. In 2030, we should be able to say, and every Balkan politician should be able to promise with a straight face, every citizen of the Balkans will be able to move throughout Europe, their goods as people, services, capital, and have the same rules apply as are applied today in the European Union, in Norway or in Iceland. And the next time there is a pandemic around the corner, the Western Balkans will be treated exactly like Norway and Iceland, which means they'll be part from day one of sharing vaccines in the way we are doing with countries in the European Economic Area. We need to exit the hamster wheel, a process of accession in which countries do reforms but don't get out. Slovenia understands how to do that. And if others in the European Union, including Germany, this and the next government lend their support, progress is possible. Thanks a lot, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Gerald, for offering these suggestions. Well, let's now turn to Simonida and hear what your take is from the perspective of Skopje.
Thank you, Florian, and thanks to the Southeast Europe Association for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here. Yes, Skopje. Once again, we seem to be holding our breath, although not that tightly, because there's also a limit to which one can hold one's breath over the years in view of the summit that's pending. We have a lot of, I think it bears a couple of minutes just to reflect on the situation that the country is currently in. This summit does not give us a lot of hope. I'm glad that the Ambassador Schütz mentioned that there is hope and expectation that the Slovenian presidency will take forward the Portuguese proposal, because that's what we have at the table, although not very much in the public. And we are hoping on that note, going back to Peter's reflections, that there will be push from the presidency to work with North Macedonia and Bulgaria on this matter. I think by now everyone conveyed the sense that we are, the joint sense that we are stuck. And that's why I started with for how long can these countries actually hold their breath, or they'll look for air elsewhere. It's not even the air, but if air is necessary. And also I'm glad that there was a lot of discussions of decades here. I myself am someone who was educated at the time of the big Euro optimism of the early 2000s. And I'm already going to enter next year my 40s. So we need, going just to repeat on Gerald's point, I think what we need desperately is a perspective within a person's lifetime. Because if we are discussing processes that go beyond a lifetime, the span of a lifetime of not one government, but a human lifetime, then we are in serious, we have a very serious problem, and then no vision or motivation can help in that case. What we've seen over the last year is the new methodology, but then again, also on Gerald's point, we've mentioned the roadmaps. We've not seen a lot of actually implementation or putting that methodology in practice. So we also need to see some things. We need to see this aspect moving, and we were hoping that that would be Albania and North Macedonia to show that the methodology is working. But then again, there was an additional moment of us feeling of being stuck. And I think this feeling also prevents us from the appreciation of some of the very practical steps and some of the progress that was made. Because we also have to keep in mind that there have been steps forward also with the Berlin process, also with a lot of the cooperation with the regional dimension. But I think this general sense of feeling stuck also prevents us from making those, from appreciating those steps, but also from working on the practical steps, because on what was discussed before. So my fear is that even those very practical issues of the connectivity agenda and many that were mentioned of the economic cooperation, recognition of diplomas and so on and so forth, will in many cases be hindered if we don't make the big progress with the vision and the story of the European accession. So I'm very glad that Peter started with the rekindling of the relationship, because that's what is necessary even for people like myself, let alone for the other, even for people like myself that go on TV every day defending this vision, because we sometimes really need a reality check even in the public. So now on that bleak note, I'll go back to Slovenia's presidency and the priorities, just to be practical and to be very wary of time. Now, if we take I was looking through as I was thinking what to discuss on this occasion, I was looking through the priorities of the Slovenian presidency, and then we find the Western Balkans in the last section of the Credible and Secure Union. And it reminded me, with all apologies up front, of the way that we deal sometimes with the issue of vulnerable groups in projects, or of mainstreaming environment issues that sometimes people can't fit into the projects because we put them aside. I think that we need to change the lens, and we need to see the Western Balkans through all of the 4 priorities of the presidency. And I think there is, from where I stand, we can see it in the resilience moment, because it's a joint resilience that we are building, and it's a joint continent that we are rebuilding. In the recovery segment, because that's the European Union did contribute a lot and did promise a lot, did already a lot to assist the post-pandemic recovery of the region, but we also realized the interconnectivity between the Union and the region. The second point might be the one that hurts the most, and that's the Conference on the Future of Europe. The Conference on the Future, Slovenia can possibly during its presidency push for the inclusion of the Western Balkans in some form in the Conference on the Future of Europe, because this is something that would help at least in rekindling that relationship. This would give a very concrete example that we might treat the Western Balkans as a potential member, as a region that will actually have a future in the same Europe that we are discussing. And I think this is one of the very practical steps that can be taken, even if not on a bilateral basis with the region or so forth. Third, one of the priorities is the reviving of the rule of law mechanisms. I think that in this case, and the instrumentarium of the European Union on the rule of law and the upcoming reports that are yet to come have a very clear link with what should be the roadmaps for the Western Balkans in terms of rule of law, because there is absolutely no there's no reason for why these processes should be disjointed. So there is a lot of the discussion on the Western Balkans on the rule of law issues, and a lot of the roadmaps needs to be very clearly linked, at least in my view, to avoid all of the double standards argument with the discussions on the rule of law in the European Union. Last, definitely the credibility of the Union and its security. I think it's very clear, given the experience of 2015 and the refugee crisis, as to the interconnectedness that this region has with the Union. I'm not in any way the presidency treats the Western Balkans there. So I'm just going to end here, and I would once again repeat that we really need to look at the region not as the vulnerable spot, but to see it as an integral part of the Union, which needs to be mainstreamed through all of its policies and priorities. Thank you.
Great, Simonida. Thank you so much. I think there's a lot of food for thought for Peter there, and maybe some already issues he wants to respond to. And I mean, I think maybe we can start the second round by this larger question of, you know, what can Slovenia do to unstick some of those points? Because I mean, I think Peter, you were beginning to, I mean, and we have a consensus that that the process of enlargement is not moving in a satisfactory way, and we can, you know, have different levels of our disappointment with it, but I think overall the assessment is clear. And the point is really, besides these you know, dates and particular markers along the calendar which provide for opportunities, the question is really, how can a presidency do something about rekindling, as Simonida was saying? We've heard some concrete suggestions, but it would be interesting to see how, from your perspective, what could Slovenia concretely do to really kind of change the dynamics, which have been kind of more and more leading to the situation to be fairly stuck when it comes to the enlargement process?
Yeah, thank you, Florian. And thank you also to other speakers for their comments and suggestions. What can we do? I think, you know, we in the European Union, we are masters of dealing with strategic questions in tactical manner. What does it mean? It means that, you know, whenever we have a strategic problem, we use tactical means in order to solve it, which means that we are always producing new mechanisms, new ideas, while the strategic decision is not being taken. So, you know, with Gerald, I almost completely agree on everything, but we almost always completely agree, except one thing, you know. I think how to exit this hamster wheel is not to invent something new, but to actually take a strategic decision on enlargement. Because if you look at the lessons learned from the past or from the previous enlargements, if there is passion, if there is ambition, then the enlargement policy as such is a tool which is working properly. And you can see, you know, all the countries which entered the European Union, in what kind of transformation process they went into. So, you know, I think 6 months is not a lot of time to change the mindset, be it in the Western Balkans, be it in the European Union, but it can be a beginning of some more advanced thinking on how to more efficiently include this region into European Union, and especially, as Simonida was saying, also in the discussions about the future of Europe. Because also, if you look at the title, it's a future of Europe, it's not the future of European Union. And you can't discuss the future of Europe without including countries which are in the heart of Europe. So really hope that also other partners are going to support us on this, that we would include in one way or the other also the thinking and ideas from the Western Balkan countries when it comes to our common future. So, you know, this is one concrete thing. Enlargement strategic decision that it's a policy which needs to work, and we'll see. I mean, you know, now hypothetically speaking, it is highly changing world is something really stupid. So I don't know what is going to happen during our presidency, but what I know is that we are going to really be pushing for this agenda to materialize, and that the countries of the region will move forward on the enlargement ladder. If this is not going to happen, it's not going to be because of Slovenia, that's for sure. No, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen because of all the reasons that also Gerald explained beautifully in his presentation. And if it's not going to happen, then it's not that we have a problem, we have a disaster. We have a disaster. Because this would mean that, you know, for almost a year and a half and even more, the enlargement process is not producing any results. And Simonida clearly explained what this means for the region as such, but also for the credibility of European Union. You know, Slovenia always said, when von der Leyen, or I'm always saying, let's say it like this, when von der Leyen took the office of the President of the European Commission, she said this is going to be a geostrategic commission. But geostrategy starts at home. It starts at your doorstep. If you can't geostrategically deal with your doorstep, you can't be a geostrategic player in the wider international arena. So I hope that we learned some lessons from the past, and that maybe now it's time to, after we kind of hopefully defeated these pandemics, and hopefully we are returning to a normal life, that now we will really start to put forward the policies which are important for Europe as such, and the European Union and the relations with the Western Balkans. Thank you, Florian.
Great, thanks, Peter. Let me ask Ambassador Schütz, because I mean, the German presidency is not that long ago, and maybe when we're thinking, maybe it's also a chance to say what would be the kind of message from the experience of the German presidency for enlargement. Could you, in a certain way, communicate to your colleagues in Slovenia? So in a certain way, what could be achieved? What are also the limitations? Because I think we could all think about what should be done for enlargement in the next 5 or 10 years, but I think let's see what can be done in 6 months. And I think there we have to be much more, let's say, much more realistic about what can be achieved. So maybe it would be good to hear what your experience is of the German presidency, and what you in a certain way would pass on as a message of what is achievable for the Slovenian presidency.
Well, that's thank you very much for this question. It's not so easy to answer. Of course, when we started the presidency, we had high expectations at ourselves, and we were indeed very much engaged, including our minister and our minister for Europe, both personally, in order to get a compromise between Bulgaria and North Macedonia. And we thought we were very close, but it was difficult. And so again, the Portuguese have worked very hard, and they have come forward with a compromise based on our compromise, which they have developed further. And so if really the Portuguese should not be successful, then this remains the major stumbling block, I believe, for Slovenia to solve. And so I agree with Peter. This will take all of the 27 member states to really want to go forward, and we will have to explain again and again and again to also the members of the EU, which are to Bulgaria concretely, that it's in all our strategic interest to go forward, and that bilateral historical issues are there, and they're important and they're emotional, but they do not belong in the negotiation framework, but they should rather be solved outside of the EU framework, and be solved by experts, by historians, and be as much as possible depoliticized. But of course, I'm talking as a German. We have historic commissions with several of our neighbors, and I know that, for example, with the Czech Republic, this historical commission has been working for quite a while. So it's we'll have to see. Maybe even the Portuguese still come to a solution, which of course would be really good. And then this would be a wonderful starting point for Slovenia to go ahead and build on a first IGC with Macedonia, with North Macedonia and Albania, and really to look for practical achievements, because that's when the difficult process is beginning. If I may, I would like to say a word to Gerald Knaus and his suggestion to have sort of the plan B and start a common market instead of looking towards EU accession, at least not at the moment. I agree that unfortunately, one might say, the attention of EU member states has been more and more diverted to problems outside of our region. This is good and this is bad, and we should not start being cynical. But I don't think that that there could be a successful plan B, like following the common economic market with Iceland and Norway. First of all, they would not really want to see Albania in that group, probably because they have certain standards, and then that's what my point really is, that the problem is, and that is also part of the problem with the EU enlargement process, that some of the countries are having problems to meet the standards, to fight corruption in a way that is that convinces member states. And so if you want to become a member of a common market at very high standards, then even without an accession perspective, the countries would have to be serious about fighting corruption and organized crime. So it would probably not help a lot. And this is why we believe that the enlargement process still is the only game in town, because it combines the standards with the carrots and the sticks. And of course, already at this point, also before the countries are even candidates, there are there's a lot of supporting projects in the pre-accession funds that the Commission provides, of course, to the candidate countries, but also to others. And so there already is a lot going on, but really what in the end will make a real change is a real push forward towards enlargement. And I absolutely agree with Peter. We have to somehow convince also the skeptics inside the EU that this is in our own strategic interest. We need to come back to explain basically to our own colleagues, this is what we need and where we have to go forward. And it's not easy.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Schütz. So, Gerald, the question is to you. I mean, from the Ambassador Schütz, is this really a viable plan B? Or, I mean, I guess the question comes in, how do you deal with rule of law issues? How do you deal with crisis of democracy in some countries of the region where you've seen the headlines, and they're not just a response to the crisis of enlargement. I mean, they're part of a system of government, and how can you tackle that with just in a certain way focusing on this economic integration, less on rule of law and democracy? I mean, and really the question is more, what can be done in 6 months? I mean, not what can be done in 5 years, but what can Slovenia concretely do within the 6 months window to shift it? Because, I mean, Gerald, you've often focused on also changing the image of the Balkans, changing the perception of the Balkans away from a conflict-prone area as one, which is, you've written the paper about Bosnia, about how it's misperceived, but how do you start changing the narrative in the member states that it's not seen as a problem, but as an opportunity or as an area which should be thought about as part of Europe in the way in which Simonida was also pointing it out? And 6 months, you don't have more time to plan further than that.
Absolutely. So let me pick up where the one point where Peter said that he disagreed, because he said the key is the strategic decision in the EU, and then the other things follow from that. And that is, of course, true. But the reality is that in the EU, powerful governments long ago made a strategic decision. We just don't want to hear what they say. President Macron in 2018 gave very detailed explanations of the French vision of Europe. I mean, he said things which are really hard to disagree with. He said, starting talks will not actually lead to reforms. I quote, I invite people to see for themselves in Belgrade, which already opened talks. Now, he could have said, go to Turkey. So he doesn't believe, the French don't believe that you need to open talks and then have influence. And he's right, because if you open talks and then nothing happens for 10 years, it will not inspire people who fight in these countries for the EU either. Secondly, he says, the EU does not work well with 27. It will not work better with 28, 29, 30, 32. He's right. We have a problem of enforcing decisions by the European Court of Justice in Poland on the judiciary, in Hungary on basic laws. We're having a lot of problems inside the EU we didn't solve. The French see them. So they made a strategic decision. They don't want more members in the near future. So what we have instead is the pretense of a process. You know, we're having these steps, but this is not good enough. People in the region see that. And President Vučić is the key player. He saw it. He's a front runner. And for 3 years, he also has been telling us in speech after speech after speech, he doesn't care about opening chapters or closing chapters. He knows it will not work. Now, the danger is, what will somebody like President Vučić do in the meantime? And that's where it gets dangerous. You know, I say, let's not pretend Bosnia is on the verge of falling apart. There are no paramilitaries in Bosnia. There are no political prisoners in Bosnia. There are regular elections in Bosnia. But there is a player who could overthrow the stability in the region. And that is the most important country that is investing in tanks, that has a media landscape that celebrates war criminals at the moment. Now, how complacent do we want to be? Now, we know that President Vučić is a pragmatist. He actually 2 years ago said, and now to our proposal, he supported it. He said, give us at least the single market. You know, he's a front runner, but he says, if you don't let me in as a member, let me at least let our products join the European Union. And this is attractive. It's a vision of change, of economic development. But here is the important, and as Ambassador Schütz is right, the important thing for the EU. To join the single market, you need to have the rule of law. You can't be Norway without independent courts and prosecutors. You can't be in the single market without procurement rules. You can't be in the single market without inspectors to enforce environmental rules. So we come to the, and this is probably the key point, and it's probably interesting to look more closely at what the difference is between what I'm arguing and the position, for example, at the moment of the German government. The German government essentially is saying even the single market is too much for the region. They won't even reach those standards. Well, then they will never join. I don't believe that. A lot of countries with a concrete, credible goal mobilized their civil society, their administration, and they reached it. And the difference between the single market and the current process is it's something that I think the French would support. Because what they are concerned about is more countries with a veto power at the table. They are not concerned about the Balkan countries being part if they meet the criteria. Now, you said 6 months, that's the test. Why am I still, you know, we've had these conversations in Ljubljana. Why am I still saying this is credible? There will be a new German government. This German government will take a look at things and it will realize the current process is dangerous because it's not working. We need something that works. There'll be coalition talks in October. Now, by that time, there will need to be a vision for the Balkans. What will concentrate our minds is that in France, there will be a presidential election where Marine Le Pen has a chance of winning. If we don't create a new system before spring next year, we will not only not have Macron in the next year move away from his reluctance, we might see the whole process blown up next year because Marine Le Pen will not play along with the niceties of let's just pretend there is a process. So between the next German elections and the government and the French elections, we need to provide answers and create a system that will be robust enough to survive whatever happens in France. Such a system, if it is moved to the level of let's give all the countries in the region, and Albin Kurti is actually demanding it too. So it's the one thing Serbia and Albania, Serbia and Kosovo are agreeing on. Kurti says, let's integrate economically. Let's make us part of the single market. So if this is something that Kurti and Vučić and the French can live with, let's, with the next German government, take a fresh look and let's point out that this isn't actually a detour. Austria joined the single market, the European Economic Area, and then was ready to join the EU 1 year later. Now, it's not about joining the economic area with Iceland and Norway. It's creating a Western Balkan economic area like the Transport Union has done. where the Western Balkan countries adopt all the laws. In case of a dispute, they can use the European Court of Justice, like in the Transport Union. It's not that they join Norway in this union. It's we create something separate for a full integration of this region into the European single market. And then when the politics changes, each country is ready to join the EU. This is years away from now, very quickly. So for the next 6 months, next German government, coalition talks, Slovenia focuses everyone on the reality, just keeps repeating, let's not believe lies, let's not make promises that don't mobilize people. Do a lot of functional things, but in the end, by the end of the year, hopefully we have a different debate in Europe with a different German government and before the French elections.
Okay, thanks, Gerald, for also pointing out the larger political framework in Europe, which I think is important. So, Simonida, to come back to you, what can the Slovenian presidency achieve? And the two things we've heard already from you is inclusion in the Future of Europe framework and thinking with the Western Balkans as part of the Future of Europe conference, but also the second one, of course, which everybody's mentioned, how to, unblock the unfathomable blockage by Bulgaria towards the accession talks. If that is achieved, is everything rosy for the Western Balkans?
No. No. I just want to go back a bit to the discussion before, and I'll go back to North Macedonia and if would everything be rosy. We were very much debating also as his proposal in terms of a separate Western Balkans common market area. And one of the concerns that, just to voice it out, because I think I need to, is this additional administrative layering of the accession process that we are creating in that case, because we already have the SAAs, which I think some of the countries need to use to their maximums as a framework, at least also in our case. And the Portuguese proposal, for example, in the case of the Bulgaria and North Macedonia issue, goes to this basic legal relationship between North Macedonia and the European Union. So now, if we are being realistic, and that is next year, I mean, the spring is in less than a year, how much of this architecture can we actually set up by then? But I'm also concerned of a lot of the overlaps of the accession process. But going back to your, also the second concern is that given that we see that the methodology is not, we see that the accession process with Serbia and Montenegro is not working, but in effect, does that mean that we need to actually punish the countries that have traditionally responded well to EU conditionalities, such as Albania and North Macedonia? So now, are we changing? Because I mean, this is a bit of a chicken and egg maybe situation. Did we not give those countries where there was theoretically the political will after an authoritarian change and supporting democratization, most of the traditional understandings of the successful conditionality in terms of the European accession process, did we not actually discourage or deprive the cases that could have been maybe successful under this model? That will remain with us for a very long time, especially if we go back to actually now discussing different modes of accession. And I think that it is we'll be entering a very, just as Gerald, with the first response to Norway in the Balkans or Switzerland in the Balkans, what was it? There was the outcry that was felt that this is stripping away the goal of the memberships. I think we just need to be very careful in terms of going back to where we started, in terms of the rekindling. This discussion at times risks the objective of actually diminishing the importance of the goal. I had to say this, Florian, and go back to your question. No, even if we start the accession negotiations with North Macedonia and we find a compromise with Bulgaria, and there is hope for inclusion in the conference on the future of Europe, no, everything won't be rosy. There's a lot of the bilateral issues that still remain. And these plague the entire region. I don't think we can move forward. And I think in your questions previously, the Serbia-Kosovo dialogue was mentioned. And I think that this has implications beyond Serbia and Kosovo itself. It has implications of the entire region. It's also the question of how do we engage with Kosovo and Bosnia. And now there are arguments going back to Gerald's proposal because it tries to deal with a lot of these issues at the same time, and I understand the merits from that perspective. But these issues will remain because Serbia and Kosovo, or Bosnia and Kosovo feel neglected also. I mean, we operate, just as many of you know, as a think tank or network of 6 countries. And our colleagues from Bosnia and Kosovo feel really deprived of attention. They feel just unjustifiably stripped of the visa, free travel. And I see the question here that was posed previously in terms of visa liberalization. I think we should be mentioning that. So there will be a lot of work. If the question is, if there is a Macron afterwards, after the French presidency, there'll be a lot of work on the Western Balkans left, even if these issues are handled by Slovenia.
Great, thanks, Simonida. And I think I would suggest actually now to pick up some of the questions we do have in the Q&A. And first and foremost, of course, they're directed at Peter. And then I would just ask if any of the other panelists would like to add to those, then they can just chip in. I mean, I think the first topic I want to bring up is exactly what Simonida just raised. This is the question by Valeza Orucci from the Kosovo embassy about visa liberalization, of course, which is a big frustration in Kosovo for understandable reasons, which keeps not moving forward despite a very clear messages from the Commission that indeed Kosovo is ready for visa liberalization. Is this something which Slovenia is going to be working on? And is there any hope, so to speak, to have some kind of breakthrough on that? And I'll tag on to that the question of Serbia-Kosovo dialogue, which is, of course, the big European project in terms of negotiations and resolving some of the open questions. And we've had talks just the other day between Albin Kurti and Aleksandar Vučić, which, didn't lead through a breakthrough, which nobody expected, of course. But is this, how can the presidency help this process along? So let's focus on those two questions, and then we'll pick up some of the more other points of the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Florian. Just 2 words on some of the things that were said before regarding Gerald. But I mean, France is not the EU. France is an important country inside of the EU, but you have, more than 20 countries inside of the European Union who are supporting the enlargement process and who are sticking by the enlargement process and who are the ones who are advocating that this strategic decision on advancing enlargement process as soon as possible should be taken. So, I think in the European Union, we still, of course, I'm realistic. I know there are more and less important countries, but still these decisions are being made by compromise. And I hope that the compromise which we are going to reach regarding this important issue is going to be a positive one in terms of accession of these countries to the European Union. So in this sense, what we are advocating, and what I'm saying is that we have to somehow bring back this parallelism of processes. Right now we don't have this parallelism. On one side, you have the connectivity project, the green agenda, the common market inside of the Western Balkans. But on the other side, you don't have this accession process negotiations working. I think when you have this parallelism going hand in hand, then you make reforms, then you make change. If not, I think the situation and the overall ecosystem is hampered and it's not producing results. And that's one thing. Regarding visa liberalization, hopes are slim. I mean, I'm not going to lie to you and say that we are going to make a huge breakthrough inside of our presidency. The talks that we had with the partners indicate that, yes, some of the countries inside the European Union are not ready to move. And we will continue with the discussions, of course, because we think that this is one of the things that is important, that needs to be addressed, because it's one of the leverages also in terms of jump-starting the whole dialogue between Serbia and Kosovo. Regarding the dialogue itself, I think it was in our newspaper today, the title, 2 men came angry to the meeting, they talked and they left angry. So this was the title in the Slovenian newspapers. And probably This is true, but I think the important thing is that this meeting finally happened. This meeting finally happened, and we will try to use this time also during our presidency to make some inroads forward. But it's not going to be just up to us. It's going to be up to how can we, inside of the European Union, and especially with our transatlantic partners, and we see that with the new administration also in Washington, there is more and more realization that this region needs to be dealt with or addressed by. How are we going to join efforts, make a common platform, and actually engage with both of the countries? It's not going to be easy. And it probably, it's not going to happen during Slovenian presidency, but at least we would like to make a good start into the dialogue for a comprehensive solution to take place somewhere close in the future.
Great, thanks, Peter. I don't know if anybody would like to chip in from our panelists. Gerald, go ahead.
Just one very concrete proposal then. Why don't we try it in a sector? And then what the point that Simonida made, stands. One has to see how this would work practically. Environment and energy. We already have a lot of frameworks. We have the association agreements. We have a lot of different mechanisms. But what we don't have is the Commission draws up a roadmap that is the same for all the 6 countries, including Kosovo, including Bosnia, and says, here is the roadmap, and you take out bits of the acquis that all of them have to meet for the transformation for the EU rules on environment and energy. You can even get the Americans on board to define this goal that this should be a coal-free region. But of course, you then have to work out on what you need in terms of costs and investment and outside support. And you give all 6 countries the chance to advance on their own pace in these reform sectors with support at the same time. And then you assess them every 2 years in the way we did with visa liberalization. You have the same roadmap. And then if Macedonia is stuck, well, but it could still make progress in that area and prove to everyone in the rest of Europe that in fact it's perhaps better and more well-placed than others. And you reward this with investment. Now, we have things that look a bit like this all over the place, but they're not brought together. They don't capture the imagination. The vision is that by 2025, if those countries make progress on these roadmaps we developed this year, then they have access to more investment, because all of these things cost a lot of money. So the vision is that by 2030, if they work hard, they are fully part of EU environmental and energy rules and markets. Now, at least take a few sectors and work on this, because then we don't lose more time. And I think this is doable. The expertise exists, and Slovenia did a great job in a narrower field with the transport community, where something very similar was developed. This could be built on. And in the end, joining the single market is just this across all the areas of the European Economic Area. That's it. It's nothing else. So it's not replacing anything. It's focusing things.
And I think, what is very clear from all of that is, of course, that transforming the societies to be resilient and compatible with the European Union and the market does not require the accession process as such only, or in fact, it can be done outside of, and I mean, this has always been the old message of saying, enlargement is a tool for an end goal, which is not actually just membership, but it's something else, of transforming the societies into its more resilient, stable, prosperous democracies. And one has to see what other tools are available to achieve the same goal. And then, of course, if they make accession at the end of the day easier and faster, once the European Union is ready, I mean, this is something which is, of course, the irony, then it is certainly a well-done preparation. One point I want to pick up, and Peter, I have to ask you this, Simon Rapp asked this, and of course, the non-paper, whose provenance we don't know, but has created lots of waves. and of course, a lot of worries in parts of the region. So this is something which, how do you deal with these stories and take them off the agenda? Because I know that certainly you are not an advocate of some of these ideas we've heard in there. So how does one get these off the agenda? Also something which Gerald pointed out, to make borders invisible rather than change them.
I mean, it's a simple answer: with credible enlargement policy. That's the only way. I mean, you can see it's always like this in the Western Balkans. If in the absence of a working policy which we all adopted, then you have introduction of some suggestions, ideas, non-papers. I mean, there was like 10 non-papers floating around at one point in time in the Western Balkans, simply because, how to put it bluntly, people have too much time, because they are not focusing. We are not focusing on the things that are important, on the things that are real. And this is, the reform processes, aligning itself with the European Union, and doing from the part of the European Union necessary positive pressure on the countries of the region to actually deliver what they need to deliver. One thing about Gerald and his proposals, I mean, this is, I think, the same story that we have right now in place. The problem is, for his ideas and for our ideas, or for our joint ideas, is a political will. It's a political will to actually move forward. For example, decarbonization. This is going to be something that we would like to move forward. But this is not something that is going to happen overnight. It needs a big amount of political will to actually move this agenda from coal to green forward, because the Western Balkan countries, and you can ask Simonida, will not be able to do it themselves. So you need a lot of resources, you need a lot of time, you need a lot of money, and you need a lot of political will. And then it can happen easily, not just with the decarbonization, sustainable development, the green lanes, but it all comes down to one simple point: how to achieve the political will of everybody, that this is the goal that we have to achieve.
Well, I would bring in Simonida, who wants to add to that. And I think it's also something which, Simonida, you were also involved in some of the civil society summits accompanying the Berlin process. And a lot of it was about actually how to generate, how to have the grassroots involved in these political processes, which also is not just about the political will, but also the pressure to have on governments to in a certain way prioritize certain issues which governments might ignore. And it's been always this, the sandwich theory, that governments respond if the EU from the top and the civil society from the bottom exercise pressure. But at the moment, it's a very open sandwich, it seems sometimes, where the pressure comes from below, but not so much from the top side of the sandwich. But Simonida, your intervention.
Thank you. Yes, going back to the sandwich theory, definitely. I mean, this links very well also to what I wanted to, I raised my hand because of Gerald's comparison with the visa liberalization. But I mean, and going back to Peter's argument that even for that, I mean, just as he said, a political decision needed to be taken to mobilize all of those peer mission experts to come to all of the 6 Western Balkan countries to assess them on the ground. And it took a sustained effort on the side of the member states and the Commission. And this is something that we are not seeing. And going back to where the argument that the sentence that I repeated a couple of times, the feeling, the fact that the process is stuck prevents us from using those tools. Now, that's why we go to the chicken and egg situation. North Macedonia at this point is one of the comparably aligned with Serbia and Montenegro. And we've been repeating that, you've been repeating that, I think has been repeating that. But we also are at the level of alignment, which is largely 2011, because that's when the European Commission stopped engaging with these countries given the signal from the European Union member states. So in order to come up with roadmaps, which I strongly believe in, there needs to be a political decision, and funds need to come with it, and monitoring needs to come with it. The enlargement side of the Commission also the other DGs need to start engaging with the Western Balkans, because this is also a wheel. The hamster wheel also is a wheel that turns our administrations, and this is not happening in practice. So I think that the political decision is still one that will need to come up front and in this case, just as Florian mentioned, we feel that the pressure from above definitely has been missing, because in many cases the perpetrators of the European idea have been those same organizations of civil society, sometimes experts, sometimes grassroots organizations that have been participating at the various summits of the Berlin process. And those actors have used as much as they can their leverage against their national governments. But the argument, the anchor that that was traditionally there in terms of the European accession, in terms of using the credibility of the accession process, is very much waning in a lot of these areas. So that's why the sandwich might be a bit more open than we would like it to be.
Great, thanks, Simonida. We have a couple of more questions towards the end. We have one which is specifically about the 3 Cs initiative, to which degree this is something relevant for the Slovenian presidency. And then also Klaus Wölfer asked about, to which degree the, a railway agenda, which has been mentioned, is possible. Maybe he says maybe a Western Balkans railway summit. And of course, as somebody who would like to take more rails in the Balkans, but is usually prevented by the absence of any reasonable connections, would be very much appreciative of that. Is this something which is imaginable as part of this kind of, decarbonization, Green Deal, and changing also the story in the region? Because I think this is one thing which Simonida is also alluding to, is when we're talking about environmental movements, they're quite strong in the region. I mean, when we're talking about citizens frustrated with deathly, air quality in the winter, with the destruction of environment through highway building and otherwise. So these seem to be topics which, could bring in EU expertise, standards, and also create some kind of positive dynamic.
You want me to start?
Yes, go ahead, Peter. Yes, of course.
Regarding the 3 Cs initiative, I think, this is something which is important for Slovenia. I mean, we are part of the initiative from the beginning. We even had a summit here in Slovenia. I think it was a couple of years ago. So it's important that we will try also during our presidency to continue implementing as much as possible the lined up projects, which are basically, the projects which are connected to the wider European network of infrastructural, energetic, and other corridors, which go down also to the Western Balkans. So if you look at this, trans-European connectivity, then definitely there are links between the 3 Cs initiative and also the things that we are doing in the Western Balkans. Regarding the railways, yes, it's true, and I would like to say hello to Klaus. Welcome, Klaus. This year it's a year of railways, actually, and this is the most sustainable, more or less, form of transport that we know. And we are in discussions with the transport community on how to move forward with this agenda also in the Western Balkans, especially in terms of connectivity. But these discussions, it was so funny. It was like I went back into my drawers and I saw one document. It was done, I think it was 12 or 14 years ago, something like that. It was done by my predecessor, who was a coordinator for the Western Balkans at the time. And he made a strategic document. And the title of the document was Reconnecting the Western Balkans. And inside, and this was 14 years ago, and inside he made, all the little links between the countries which are still not implemented. And I went and checked, and they are still not implemented. you know. So I think we all agree here among us, and this is not something that is surprising. Yes, we need to start walking the walk.
Thanks, Peter. And with that, I would like to just give any of the other panelists a chance for any last interventions they would like to have as we're approaching the end of our session. So I don't know if Simonida, Gerald, Ambassador Schütz, if you would like to add something to our kind of how to walk the walk, so to speak, or work the work. Ambassador Schütz, yes.
Yes, I would like to come in again and respond to some of the questions. I think we sometimes oversee what is already being done, irrespective now of the actual accession talks. There's so much also in investment funds. The EU has delivered an EU investment package of up to 9 billion euros for the financial cycle, which is there and which needs good projects to be implemented. And from my experience in Albania, many of the road projects are going on. It takes time, especially for railway, but also there the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development is providing funds in addition to EU money, and so there are opportunities there to be used, and I think. We need to focus on the enlargement issue, and I insist on that still. But one has to also look at what is being done already, and one has to maybe push all the actors, including the governments, to use these funds and not to take the presumably or allegedly cheaper Chinese credits. I mean, that's really important that we work with the governments on that issue, and indeed connectivity is one of the issues also for the Berlin process. Connectivity of people, but of course also of infrastructure and energy, by the way. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. We have few seconds left for final thoughts, Gerald and Simonida.
One thought: put all 6 countries on the same race.
Mm-hmm.
Don't divide two front runners which are not front runners, two countries in the middle which are not really in the middle. North Macedonia is up there with reforms but is stuck. And then having Kosovo and Bosnia, we don't discuss about them at all. They don't fit into the current methodology. Let's think of how the whole region might reach some realistic goals. And these goals must be goals that are attractive in Belgrade, attractive in Pristina, attractive in Berlin, in Ljubljana, but also in Paris and The Hague. And if you put these things together, you arrive at something that might work. But we don't have much time. Let's not wait until middle of 2022. We might wake up in a different Europe.
Thank you. And we will not want to have a paper which is in Peter's closet and just gets discovered in 15 years and is the same as we'll discuss then. Simonida.
No, I just want to thank you all. And I'm hoping that at the end of the Slovenian presidency, we might have a more positive picture than we have at this point. Thank you.
Indeed, I think panels on the Western Balkans have been mostly gloomy recently, and I mean, there's lots of reason to be pessimistic or to be at least concerned and worried. But I think at least it's encouraging to hear from Peter about the plans and at least some ambitions, but also ones which are clearly based on realism and experience of Peter and other people in Slovenia who've been working for the Western Balkans enlargement for a number of years. So I'd like to thank all of you for joining our panel, the audience for listening to us. A reminder, tomorrow, the Südosteuropa-Gesellschaft will organize another panel on Slovenia since 30 years since independence, which will more reflect on domestic developments in Slovenia and the trajectory over the last decades. So I hope you'll join that panel and see you again soon, hopefully very soon in real life. We can't wait for that to happen. And good luck, Peter, with the presidency.
Thank you.